Hello, everyone, and good evening. Thank you for joining my live stream this evening. Many of you are aware that I have been discussing the UN Migration Pact with you over the last few weeks. This pact, as you know, has been signed in Marrakesh and is now effectively up and running. And it, as many of you are aware, will lead to a position where migration will become a human right. The distinction between genuine refugees and economic migrants will be no more. But also, one of the most worrying aspects of this migration pact is the fact that those who speak out against mass immigration will be censored. And it does appear that that censorship has already begun. Now, I, as a journalist, I suppose I know what it is like to be censored because I lost my job at the Irish Independent because I took Maurice McCabe's side. I had worked there for nearly 20 years, and when Sergeant McCabe came to me in 2012, long before he was known in the public eye, I supported him. I examined the work that he had been doing. And I took his side, and as a result of that, I paid with my career, and I was reduced to having to go to the High Court to defend my good name. And as a result of that, I suppose I've been able to continue my work as an investigative journalist because I believe that the public interest is not being served by journalism today. So when I lost my job for doing what I believed was right and in the interests of Ireland and the Irish people, it's indescribable how that feels when you give almost 2 decades of your life to a newspaper and only serve them and your profession. I suppose it's not something I've spoken about very often because I don't like to do victimization and playing the victim. It's one of the things that's very wrong with Irish society today. But I feel very, very strongly about censorship and very strongly about free speech. And I'm joined this evening by a young man who has been doing tremendous work in the public interest on YouTube. He's one of the best known Irish YouTubers. He describes himself as a political commentator. I would describe him as one of the finest journalists that we have in Ireland at the moment. He is approaching subjects that very few journalists in the mainstream media are willing to touch. His name is Dave Cullen, and his YouTube channel is called Computing Forever. And he's been spelling out some very, very difficult home truths recently about how our country is changing, how the Irish people in a matter of decades will be a minority in their own country as a result of the uncontrolled mass immigration that is happening in our country at the moment, which nobody was told was going to happen. Nobody was asked about it, and nobody has been able to explain why it is happening and the impact it is going to have and is having on all of our public services and on the country that we all love dearly. So, Dave, I'm sorry about that lead in.
No, that's incredibly overly generous of you to say those very nice things. Thank you, Gemma. I very much appreciate it, and I appreciate being on your show. It's nice to be called a young man again, actually, considering I don't feel that this work will age you. This will. Last year I had like one gray hair here. Now I have like a bunch of them at the bottom.
Well, you wouldn't know that at all. I mean, I'm only a novice in this YouTube game compared to you. You've got a huge following on YouTube internationally at home. And it's, you know, seeing your videos over the last few weeks, so professionally done. You're an excellent writer. You're a brilliant broadcaster. But today, something happened that is really quite terrifying for those of us who care about free speech. You produced a video called Ireland, the Past, the Present, and the Moral Inversion. And tell me what happened, Dave, after you put that up.
Well, it's the first time this has actually happened to me. That a video has been placed into what's called limited state, and it was introduced. It was a system that was introduced last year by YouTube, because they didn't. It's extraordinary. It's kind of like soft censorship in a way. It's a lot like Twitter's shadow banning, only that you actually know you're being shadow banned. So
And
the video.
sorry, Dave, to those who may not know what shadow banning is,
Right.
just explain
Well, on
that.
Twitter, there's this thing called shadow banning, whereby they'll take an account and you'll be tweeting away, but your tweets don't actually reach the feeds of your followers. And so your followers don't actually see what so you're basically tweeting into the ether, literally. It's not going anywhere. And in this case, what happened was, so I made this video, as you say, and it was a video that was talking about, we can talk about what it was about, but it was a video talking about mass immigration in Ireland and demographics and how things are changing. And I did touch upon briefly the UN Migration Pact in it, though I have made a separate video about that subject entirely. And within about an hour or so, I could be wrong, give or take, I noticed that the monetization icon was checked off. And I thought, that's strange. I'm pretty sure I did enable the monetization. So I went back and checked, and I actually went into my emails and saw that it had been placed into limited state. And the email says, that this video is inciting hate speech or violence or something like that. They don't obviously get specific because they never do. And that was that. So that's the first time that a video of mine has ever been placed into limited state. There's no portion of the video at all, and this is coming from absolutely everybody who's watched it, has commented on it, because it's on BitChute.com as well. It's on Minds. There's no point to the video where at any point where I express any kind of hatred towards any group or people or individual. There's no call to violence in it. Of course there isn't. Doesn't matter. The point of the fact of the matter is, it's just it had to go.
It's a really beautiful portrayal of Ireland, in fact, and it's very ugly also in the way that you describe what's happened to our country. And I'm going to now play the video. Hopefully it will play okay. You won't be able to see the wonderful graphics that Dave has used, but you can watch it later. But I would like to play it because I think it is well worth playing and hearing. Okay, so I'm going to turn it on now, and
I'll disable my camera just in case there's any bandwidth issues when you're playing it, because sometimes that can happen. Okay, go ahead.
What makes a place? What makes a country? I'd like to visit Japan someday. What do I expect to find when I get there? Well, presumably Japanese culture, which didn't evolve out of thin air. It is a product of the Japanese people. It is tied to their identity and their ancestral heritage. They represent the overwhelming majority of the population. I don't expect to see much in the line of diversity. There isn't much in the line of diversity there, but that's okay, because I'm going to Japan, which is the home of Japanese people, and that's precisely why I'm going there, right? To see Japan and its people in their homeland, to be immersed in their culture and way of life, which is recognizably different to my own. So it's clear that Japanese people exist as a group. Their nation is real and unique. It is comprised of people of the Japanese tribe. If you had the power of Q from Star Trek, and you could just snap your fingers and swap the peoples of Japan and Nigeria around, then Japanese identity and culture would have switched to the landmass of Nigeria and vice versa. The land of Japan would no longer be Japanese anymore. It would be Nigerian, because the people make the place. Ethnic Japanese people represent 98.5% of the population of Japan right now. No one is calling for more diversity in Japan. No one there is actually thinking, diversity is our strength. Let's become less homogenous for no reason. Poland is 96.7% ethnic Polish. It is a similar majority figure, obviously. Ireland was once also just as homogenous. Poland has very strong borders. It is resisting globalism and the EU with everything it has, and it pulled out of the UN Migration Pact, unlike Ireland. This is some video footage I found online from YouTube user called Liffybanks. This is Dublin in 1965, when Ireland was about as ethnically homogenous as Japan is today. Not an awful lot of diversity here, as you can see. It's strange. Nowadays, leftists would find the idea of Ireland remaining as Irish as this to be racist and xenophobic or something. But no one in the 1960s thought that Ireland was a racist place. Irish people were just getting on with their lives, being Irish in Ireland, in their country, which they held sovereignty and dominion over. I don't think I can make this clear enough to many of my subscribers who live in countries that have been diverse for a very long period of time. But mass immigration is so new to Ireland. It only really began between 2000 and 2005 and really picked up between 2003 and 2005. Prior to that, Dublin was overwhelmingly comprised of Gaelic Irish people, and so was the rest of Ireland. Look at these streets. Look at this pace of life. Dublin today is completely multicultural, and I would argue fairly soulless. Most of the people who staff hotels, shops, and restaurants are not Irish. The Irish banter, the crack, and the camaraderie is just slowly slipping away. Dublin has lost its character, and it's become a place where people don't feel connected with each other. This is a known result of mass immigration, where different groups of people effectively feel little to no strong affinity for their nation that they reside in. Even the descendants of the indigenous people begin to feel less of a kinship and connection to their homeland because they don't recognize it anymore. As we've seen in other countries in Europe, where mass immigration has taken hold over a much longer period of time, eventually balkanization takes place. Essentially, many nations form inside of the host nation as people choose to self-segregate and live with people who are like them. And those divisions only increase over time. Like any country, Ireland cannot remain Irish if the very thing that makes the country Irish, i.e. the people, are replaced demographically with different ethnic groups of people. Every step away from a homogenous majority is a step towards the country becoming less Irish. Ireland is only 82% Gaelic Irish now and declining rapidly. We are expected to fall below 50% of the population by mid-century, but it could be even sooner now that we've signed up to the UN Migration Pact. So we're on course to become a minority based on current immigration rates, and we're not allowed to talk about this reality, especially now since the pact is expected to make criticism of mass immigration illegal. The Irish people were never consulted on any of this. They were never asked if they wanted their country to no longer be homogenous. They were never asked if they wanted to be demographically replaced in a few decades, and they were never asked about the Migration Pact, and most people haven't got a clue about it. And of course, any resistance to this great replacement is considered racist and xenophobic, despite the fact that it really isn't. Over the past 3 decades, a cultural Marxist agenda has ravaged Irish society. A process of moral inversion has taken place, where everything that was once considered good is now bad, and vice versa. Everything that we were once in favor of, we're now against. Instead of celebrating truth, we celebrate the lie that gender is fluid, a construct, and that men can be women and vice versa. Instead of celebrating nationalism and patriotism, we celebrate a globalist vision where our nation is nothing but a province of the EU bureaucratic superstate. Instead of celebrating Irishness, we celebrate becoming less Irish, or we prioritize other cultures rather than our own. Instead of putting Ireland first and dealing with our homeless crisis, we prioritize asylum seekers and economic migrants, placing them in direct provision centres at the taxpayer's expense. Instead of celebrating journalistic freedom and integrity, mainstream media publications will fire or simply not hire anyone who isn't in favour of the progressive agenda. Instead of celebrating equality of opportunity and meritocracy, we celebrate equality of outcome and call it equality. Instead of celebrating the importance of the traditional family unit for a child to have a mother and father, we celebrate alternative lifestyles. The child's rights become secondary to who has the right to have a child. This is where the marriage referendum came in, to redefine the family. Instead of encouraging personal accountability and self-reliance, the state now encourages reliance on welfare and social programs, which of course mean higher taxes for everyone. Instead of recognizing the Christian roots of the country, the moral and spiritual origin story of Christian nations being the birth of Christ, the birth of a child being symbolic of the future, of renewal, hope, and tomorrow, instead, the left celebrates murdering the unborn, thus destroying our future. Now, this is a nation that has given up on itself. It's like a sickness. We're racked with nihilism and a neurotic self-defeating attitude. Nations don't survive if they adopt this way of operating. But as you can clearly see, the process was an attempt to modify the Irish people. That way, you can modify the culture and nation in short order. If all of these agendas had been pushed on us all at once, people would have rejected them outright because it would have taken authoritarianism to enforce them so quickly and completely. But They were gradually implemented bit by bit over a long period of time so that the population were softened up to them and that the youth could be sufficiently indoctrinated in schools. Similarly, if the mass migration had have been pushed all in 1 year, for example, transforming Ireland from being homogenous to diverse and multicultural in a short period of time, people would have seen it for what it was, an invasion, and for what it truly is, ethnic replacement. But if it's done gradually over many years and dressed up with propaganda as important, noble, progressive, and forward-thinking, the populace generally learns to accept it over time, despite the fact that their ancestral claim on their homeland is slowly slipping from their grasp with each passing year. Our political class have sold us out completely, and before too long, hate speech legislation will be drafted to criminalize further resistance and political dissent. But that won't stop true patriotic Irish nationalists from speaking up about what's happening, because there is no choice. I said this before. Someone else isn't going to come along and make this right. It's just us. They are anticipating our fear will drive us to essentially self-censor and to surrender before the end. But it's not the end yet. In a society with a pessimistic view where people don't believe in the future and don't really believe in anything, people always believe it's the end. There's a lot that they can take away from us. The process is well underway, but they can't take away our right to choose. You can be cowed into silence, bullied, deplatformed, demonetized, but what you must never do, what they must never be able to take from you, is your heart and your defiance. If they take those from you, then they truly own you. I know what Irishness is. I know what an Irish Ireland looks like. I was there. I'm old enough to remember life before all of this, before the moral inversion. As long as it can be remembered, as long as it can be passed down, and as long as it lives in the hearts of Irish people, it will not be conquered. However, it must not be consigned to myth and legend. It must physically continue to exist. For that, the Irish people must begin to question everything that they've been told over the past 3 decades. They must not be afraid to rediscover their intellectual curiosity and their heritage. You know, it's kind of funny. I know a lot of Americans who come back to Ireland to rediscover their ancestral roots. They go to graveyards and churches. They look up their descendants and trace back their family tree, looking through records to find a connection to their great-great-great-grandparents or whatever. I think perhaps it's time for Irish people who were born here and live here to do the same, to reconcile with their past, to learn that you are truly part of the ongoing story of Ireland. And that narrative thread has woven its way throughout Irish history, through the lives of your ancestors, stretching back 1,000 years, and it culminates in you sitting here now listening to this video. That story should tell you that you have a unique claim to this land. You inherited Ireland, and it is your responsibility, our responsibility, to save it, to protect it, and to pass it on to our children in the best possible condition. We only have one nation, a small island in the Atlantic Ocean. It's ours, and it's all we have. If we lose this, you will have no homeland to give to your children. They will not inherit a place to call home. The only way for us to know who we are as a people and to know who we must be again is to rediscover the past, our culture, our traditions, and our story, to know how the Irish people lived and what made Ireland unmistakably identifiable and immediately recognizable as Irish. Because that is what makes a country what it is, the people.
So,
700 years of oppression, Gemma, and the Paddies still can't get a break. Even Google is now in favor of it, the new planters, it seems. We can't have anything. This is the thing. They talk about the oppression Olympics, and like, here we go again. You know, we're not even allowed a homeland.
You're not on camera. You need to just switch your camera on again.
There we go. Sorry.
Well, first of all, I mean, I'd encourage anyone to watch that while it is still up, because the beautiful imagery that you've used, you know, it's heartbreaking. It's so well put together, and it sums up how an awful lot of us feel about what is happening to the country. Sorry, I interrupted you there, Dave.
Yeah, no, I was finished, but no, I mean, I get it. I mean, on that point, you know, I recall when this all began, because I'm 35 now, so I'm old enough to remember life in Ireland when, put it bluntly, it was mostly just us, right? and I recall like having a conversation with someone around 2003 or 4, whenever the serious uptick in mass migration happened. And I remember them saying, I just got on a bus and there's all these accents. And this was new, you know, this has been something that London or the UK has had for a very long period of time. We've only really had it, Gemma, for about 15 or 16 years. It's very recent. And I don't know whether it's easy to communicate that to people who are from the United States or France or Germany or the UK, who've had mass immigration a lot longer than we have. And yet the percentage of how, you know, the demographics, the amount of Irish people, the native indigenous people who are left in the country is actually down to the same amount that there is white British people in the UK. So it's like 82%. And yet we've had mass immigration for only a decade and a half, and they've had it for several decades now, since the 1960s. So,
and they have it for the reasons that are utterly different to ours, because they have their colonial past, they have a certain obligation to those former colonies. We have absolutely none whatsoever. And this nonsense about, oh, but so many of our diaspora had to leave. And well, that was A, because they were forced to leave, but B, they went to the States, Australia, the UK, and they built those countries. Those people were badly needed. Unfortunately, as much as we would love to welcome in half the world, well, some people would. I personally don't feel like that. You know, I think people are much better staying at home, making the most of their own country. Call me whatever you want. I don't care. I've been called it all. I know that I'm not a racist, so I don't mind being called it at this stage. But at the moment, given the austerity that we've been subjected to as a people for the last 10 years and will continue to be, how we can welcome in other people when we cannot house our own citizens in need. Our hospitals and our schools are falling to pieces. This is an act of treason. It is an act of utter insanity against our country and all of the people who are being invited into it, who will break our welfare state. And that is the reality. There's no getting away from it, Dave.
And they can't possibly appreciate the country as it is. They can't possibly appreciate, you know, the culture and the hard work that went into building our society. It was something you and I inherited. And that means that there's something that needs to be instilled within us to understand that we should appreciate it, that it was hard fought, that it wasn't something that our ancestors. I remember I did a video diary. I'm working on a family tree at the moment. I did a video diary with my great aunt, and she was talking about her life growing up in Kilkenny. And there was just no welfare state there. You had to go out and work. That was it. There was no safety net. And yet we have people who have wildly different cultural views and political views to us. And they're coming in here and they're just being given welfare, but they didn't inherit this land. They didn't work for it. And so it is heartbreaking to see that we have enabled this kind of handout culture that demands free stuff. And that's why to be honest, I fear a communist takeover eventually, because the youth in this country, the young people, have been primed to just be given to expect, you know, rights without any effort, money without working for it, and education without earning it or understanding the cost to other people. It's an extraordinary time to be alive.
Well, it is. And, you know, I mean, the figures which you won't read about in the mainstream media speak for themselves. You know, we know that 1 in 3 of the new homeless are migrants. We know that 1 in 3 people who receive social housing are migrants. In Ireland, this is in Ireland. 1 in 3 people who receive social housing are non-citizens. Yeah, how is that fair? Just explain to me how that is fair.
This is the thing. We're told that we're this fast-paced knowledge economy in this developed country, and yet what do we have? 18,000 people who are on medical hospital waiting lists of some description, and about 1 million people basically who are the working poor, and that's what we have now. And so we have the economy of of Google on one side, and we have our Silicon docks that we're also very proud of. And we're about to have our skyline completely defaced as well, by the way, in the next few decades. We have all of this happening. We have all these data centers that are they're cropping up all over southwest Dublin and decimating the countryside. And we have also a lot of industrial estates, I could name a few, where a lot of the people, you know, getting off the bus to go to work are not Irish. And I know of a recruitment company, actually, they opened up a new response center, and it was a customer care center. And the whole pitch was that this was going to create, I don't know, 60 new jobs or whatever. But what they didn't tell people at the time was that these jobs were actually going to be coming from Europe, and that these people were simply being moved from, I think it was Spain or Italy. I'll actually have to find the link now to this story. But they were basically being moved to Ireland. And that's a very common thing to happen in Dublin right now. We have a lot of these companies that are simply, they're residing here. They're not contributing anything with respect to tax, so not an awful lot. And they're hiring people who aren't Irish, but it makes it look like, you know, it's easy to kind of fudge the figures in the workforce to make it look as if, yeah, look, we're putting a lot of people back to work, but actually, no, we're just inviting people from abroad to do a job that Irish people would love to do, but because their wages are being completely compressed, they can't do them at that price point. We're at a situation where you can be sitting, you know, in an internet cafe in Bangalore, and you can go, I've never been to Ireland in my life, but I think I'm going to go, and I found this job on this recruitment site, and I'm going to apply for it, and I'm going to just go move there. I mean, this is, you know, so you're competing, the Irish people are competing against the world. So it's natural that, you know, our living standards are going to collapse. And then you'll find yourself in a situation where you're in a, you know, crappy new housing estate, and you and your partner are trying to pay a mortgage. And next door to you, there's like, it could be 20 adults. And, you know, at least 11 or 12 of them are working. A couple of families could be living in there. Several families could be living there, and you're competing against that. So the white picket fence, 2.4 children or more, which we really should be having more at this point, it's just gone out the window. Both of you have to be working. And then what happens is you put your child into daycare because you have to be working. And then the state has their hands on your kid from a young age. And so the child always believes that Big Brother, the state, is basically God, is mother and father.
Exactly. And, you know, the reality is that many migrants from the third world are willing to accept much, you know, different, lower standards than we are used to in the first world. And, you know, an example of this recently, there was a case in Cork of an Irish man who was being evicted from his bedsit by a foreign landlord, allegedly. We're not sure if the landlord even existed, but his name was foreign. And he was replacing this local man with 6 migrants in a bedsit, you know. So this is what is going on here. It's not out of any compassion for the people coming to our country, none whatsoever. This is all about greed and money. And when people, you know, yell, the crybabies, I call them, you know, racist, xenophobic, because that's all, they never are able to actually argue the case with you. You know, I mean, it's so immoral of them, because they don't care about these people. These people, these screamers are mainly being funded by the likes of George Soros, who wants to decimate nation states. And we've spoken about that. But, you know, I mean, the insanity.
It's not all that. It's important to understand what the school system has done to them as well. And I remember when I started in secondary school, civic, social, political education, which is, I mean, I spoke to Herman Kelly about this because, you know, he's like, he used to teach it, you know, it's just, he just said it's pure propaganda. That stuff is poison. And if you look at the books now, when I was there, it was like CSPE phase 1. It was pretty tepid. It was just like, this is the EU. It's great. Here's how the parliament works. Or doesn't. And now, if you look at the books, Gemma, you should probably have a look at the education system. What do they call it? What's the first part of secondary school called again? Oh yeah, the junior cert. The junior cert exams. There's a series of books. One of them is called, I think it's called Speak Out, and then Get Up, Stand Up, you know, stand, all this kind of stuff. It's all, even the words, it's like activism. It's not teaching kids about history or politics or philosophy. It's actually, or the humanities or anything like that. It's actually teaching them to be activists. And that's the point. And
it's teaching them to be victims as
Right,
well.
it's teaching them.
You know that you're going to be a victim, so you need, and it's not teaching them to be strong, patriotic, you know, proud of your country, stand up for your country. What can you do for your country? None of that. It's you know, maybe you feel like a boy today and you're a girl, so that's okay, but you'll be mistreated for that. So, you know, we'll mollycoddle you and turn you into little snowflakes. That's what's happening, Dave.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I think I was watching a video there we're getting this stuff as well now in schools. Is why I constantly tell parents, you got to watch what's on the curriculum and what your kids are learning. And there was a story I covered in the UK. 17 students in one school identified as transgender, and there was another one. Then shortly thereafter, Piers Morgan had Munro Bergdorf, a transgender person who has previously said something to the effect of the white race is the most violent force of nature on earth, or something like that, on BBC. Delightful that BBC put that state sanctioned propaganda out. But anyway, they were talking about 76 kids in this one school identify as transgender. This stuff is everywhere, and Ireland is actually this is the thing, the left still calls Ireland a very Catholic conservative country. It is. It's for real. Are you for real? The Catholic Church is completely neutered at this point. It's entirely domesticated in the hands of the left. Every institution has begun, and our universities as well, has become corrupt, as you well know. And all of it leans to the progressive stack, as it were. So it's laughable. The idea that anybody thinks that there's a vestige of institutional conservatism of any description that's worth talking about still left in this country is just laughable. And so all of this stuff is actually going to come in. And as we said, we talked about beforehand with the trans thing. This is social engineering and experimentation of kids. The left will rightfully talk about child sex abuses in the Catholic Church, and that's absolutely something they should be doing. But they won't call it out when they do it, which is essentially they're doing it under the guise of tolerance and inclusion and diversity and equality and all these things. A child doesn't know what the hell they are when they're that age. It's still developing, and they should be given the space to do that. But now we're in a situation where, as I said to you, in the future, there's going to be an unimaginable amount of lawsuits about this stuff. And there's not going to be too much that people like you and I can do, because we're kind of shut down with, you're transphobic, you're this, what do you know? You don't know my pain. But in 10, 15, 20 years, it's going to be the trans apostates, as it were, who are going to come out and go, yeah, I was taken in by this bullshit. And now it's going to be lawsuits, and now there's going to be activists who will come out and rightfully begin to push back against this. But unfortunately, there's going to be an awful lot of pain, an awful lot of mental illness, and sadly, potentially an awful lot of people committing suicide, because that's a huge factor in the trans mental illness.
This is such a really good point. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this over the last few weeks and the impact it's having on children. We know that, you know, within the trans community, I think those that go on to have physical sex changes, I think there's a attempted suicide rate of over 40%. So, you know, while your generation, well, not your generation, I suppose, generation of men in their 40s, 50s, 60s were likely to go into school and be physically and sexually abused in Ireland, not the women. I mean, let's be real about this. It didn't really affect women of my generation anyway, but certainly it affected men. But the current form is it's mental abuse that these children are being subjected to when they go into school, when they should be learning, as you say, about history, about free speech, about the importance of democracy, about citizenship, and all of those important things, not about whether they may feel like they're a girl today when in fact they're a boy. Just on that point, you know, that you'd swear we were still living back in the Ireland of Dev and Archbishop McQuaid. I mean, it's such nonsense. You had this, you know, when the French last weekend were tearing down the symbols of globalism in their city, standing up for our continent and its great diversity, and I mean diversity in the original sense. What's happening in Dublin? There's a protest by the hard left over the ownership of the National Maternity Hospital because they want the nuns out. You know, and I often think, when was it that our healthcare system went into a state of, you know, unrecognizable disrepute or disrepair? When was it? It was actually when the nuns left. and when the state took over. That is the reality, because the nuns kept our hospitals spick and span. And I can say this from experience because my mother was a nurse. And my goodness, you know, they worked hard. They were nurses. It was a vocation. It wasn't the way it is today. And that's no disrespect, but it's become a degree now, and it's more of a profession rather than a vocation. So, you know, the education system, I'm not defending for a second what happened to many people at the hands of the Catholic Church in schools. However, to be fair to the Catholic Church, when they ran the health service and the education system, I believe it was an awful lot better than it is today. And I think the figures would testify to that. And this nonsense, you had the sock Dems and people like that out last Saturday, you know, protesting about the National Maternity Hospital, as if under the previous legislation, any woman was ever denied a termination when she needed one, when her life was in danger. That never happened, nor did it happen in the case of Savita Halappanavar. So, you know, really, Dave, I mean, you know, the truth is being decimated every single day in our country, and lie after lie after lie is being told.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why videos like that get censored, because they're not extreme. They actually speak to, most people are in the center. I think most people will be won over by a solid, persuasive argument backed by facts. I think most people, if you can reach them, and the point is to make it impossible to reach them. And when you talk about abortion, you know, we do have a situation in this country where, and this is something that Justin Barrett talked about when I had him on the show before, we have the unenviable task, unlike the UK, where they're already starting to get a credible resistance to this globalism because they have UKIP and they have other parties as well. And they have at least some of the, I suppose, social infrastructure in place to fight back. We are in the minority. And I don't want us to have this kind of persecution complex or victim, oh, woe is us, we're very small numbers, but we are in the minority. And the last referendum made that very clear. You know, you can say, but there was a heavy amount of funding and all the political parties were on board, which should have been alarm bells for most people. And you can talk about that and where that funding came from. But prior to that, the 2015 with the LGBT lobby and the millions that were raised, I understand. But when Irish people went into that polling booth, they knew what they were doing. They knew what they were voting for. And that is more scary to me than censorship, because it suggests that Irish people really have drank the Kool-Aid largely. Now we can win them back. You know, we're about 36% if you look at the last referendum, if that's more or less what the bloc that we represent. So but I do think in all honesty, we've got probably a good 5 years of persuasion. And then after that, I think we're going to be in a bit of trouble. And that's why these next 5 years are going to be crucial. And I think it's the reason why we're seeing this escalation now, because I've spoken to a lot of people online and in the real world, and there is a sense that things are leading to a crescendo. Everything seems to be coming to a boil at this point. Sorry, is my sound okay? I got some message on the screen for a second, but no,
it's excellent. Yeah.
Okay, it does seem as if that we're kind of reaching something now. We're seeing this right across the board. You know, whether it's escalation on censorship online, a lot of deplatformings that are happening, people being demonetized. They're literally coming for the money in your pocket at this point. But also, what we're seeing with potentially the formation of the firewall of the EU with Article 11 and 13, which could completely destroy us to the point where we may need more than a VPN. We may need to actually leave the country to continue doing what we're doing.
And just explain that to people.
Well, the EU Copyright Directive is some legislation that is, what I would say, in very much in advanced stages at this point. And it is stated as something that's designed to protect rights holders in the music and movie industries and, you know, artists and things like this. And what it will do is it will force social networks to implement an upload filter. Basically, a significant database will have to be created somehow specific to every single social network over a certain size. This would include Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and many others, of course. and they will have to filter absolutely everything, whether it's an image or an audio file or a video that goes up to their platform. And they'll have to determine if it contains something, algorithmically this will be done, if it contains anything at all that could be, contain something that belongs to someone else. And that would actually blow away fair use, transformative fair use, which is what people like myself and others do. We produce a video, but we use clips. We don't completely explicitly infringe upon copyright. We only use clips as for commentary and for obviously to I suppose critique something and to provide some sort of analysis. And so that would be impossible. And the second thing, that's Article 13. Article 11 is the link tax, whereby the platforms would have to pay a fee if they include a link to a major publication like the Irish Times or the BBC or whoever it is. So if I'm including my source links, which I do in the description box, and I say, for more reading on this, here's the sources to where I found these stories or whatever, that would be impossible. I wouldn't be able to do that. So the only people who would be able to pay these extortionate fees would be large publications. And so what, in fairness to YouTube, they're actually against the EU copyright directive, though they're not totally against the idea of content filtering. And Susan Wojcicki of YouTube has said that they don't want it to go through because this would basically potentially mean that a lot of content would be no longer accessible in the EU, and that EU users would also be frozen out. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know whether that means we won't be able to upload content at all, or certain types of content, or our channels would simply just be nuked. Anything's possible. So that's what I'm trying to say, is whether it's online censorship or whether it's what's happening in the streets in Paris, all of these things are connected at the cultural level and what you're seeing in schools, right up to the globalism that people are sick and tired of. And the political correctness, which has been there for a couple of decades now, has been used as a weapon to gradually acclimatize people like the frog in the boiling water to the idea of self-censoring. Because if people are self-censoring, it's really easy later on for true draconian censorship to be implemented at the state level.
Absolutely. And I mean, you know, when I was describing what we were going to be talking about this evening, you know, I put out my tweet and Facebook post with a certain sense of urgency, because I want to make it clear to people listening, we're not doing this for the fun of it. We're not in this business because it's enjoyable, because it gives us huge pleasure. We're doing this because we are deeply frightened about what is going on in our country. I'm not traipsing around the country at the moment on our anti-corruption campaign because it gives me, you know, some sense of pleasure. It's an absolute nightmare. And we are trying to waken people up to what is going on, but there's only so much we can do. I mean, you know, I mean, I don't know if you are financially gaining anything from this. I certainly am not. All I gain is a hell of a lot of heartache, misery. In the last few days, I have had death threats against me for what I am doing, but I will continue to do it because I care profoundly about the country that I was born in, and a country that I see disappearing before my eyes. But, you know, people like us who are doing this sort of work, those of us who are listening, those of you who are listening to us now, you know, we are asking you to spread the word about what is going on, to waken up. I mean, it's not enough to just say, okay, that was an interesting chat, and then that's it, or put up a comment. And we appreciate all your comments. And I hear the pain in your comments that you send, and the fear, and how can we get people motivated? What can we do? There are people sitting around Ireland tonight, sitting in front of that box, watching RTE, believing the lies, believing the corruption, believing all the nonsense stories they're telling you about diversity and how racist everyone is if they don't accept everything. And they are the people that must be woken up. And we are trying our best, but we just can't do it on our own, Dave.
Well, I hear exactly what you're saying, and it's extraordinary to hear you articulate thoughts and completely mirroring my mind in the last, I don't know how long I've been doing this, for the last 2 years. And I tell you, I've been burned out basically since 2016. I'm not ashamed to admit it. But I tell you, this is the thing. Okay, so a lot of people have this kind of black pilled thing, and it's easy to post comments and say, "Goodbye, Ireland. Well, it's done. We're screwed," and this and that, and it's very fatalistic. Unfortunately, we don't do ourselves any kind of good service here. And the point of the fact matter is, there are bigger channels than mine, and I had a video censored today, and the reason I had it censored was because it was effective. You cannot underestimate just how effective we can be. I mean, I was actually quite surprised last week when Grant Torino, whose channel I very much like, Rowan and a few others, and Herman Kelly, and I think it's Ben Scallon, I think his name is, I don't remember his second name, but
Ben, yeah.
that they actually went, Irexit and a few National Party guys, and they went out and I think they gathered like 150 people for that vigil. And what happened is irrelevant at what happened, but the point is they did it, and there wasn't any major craziness. Yeah. And this is the thing, the cost, this is what I just really realized in the last while. I've been talking to a friend about this because it's what John Waters said the other night. It keeps you up at night. It is unpleasant knowing this. The audiences know this. I see it in the comments that this can be depressing and dark and awful. It's painful, of course. You don't want this to be. I don't want. But the thing is, things can get much worse. Now, to know this is actually a good thing, because it's not to say that if we do nothing, that the cost of doing nothing is far greater than the cost of acting. If my life is greatly shortened because of this, so be it, because I don't want to live in hell, and hell is coming, but it's a choice, and I choose not to live there. And that's why
I think many of us feel our lives are going to be shortened as a result of this work. I think it has become an absolute crisis for us, without a doubt. And those of us who are eating, sleeping and breathing it see how quickly it's coming down the tracks, and we think, where are the rest of our people? Yes, they're being brainwashed by the mainstream media, but how can they stand by? I mean, surely they see some of what's going on in the continent. Surely they see, when they walk down the streets of our cities, the appalling change. Surely they're aware of the crime epidemic that we're in. And do they just close their doors and say, that's it? Who cares? Are they so apathetic? I watched a speech today in the Italian Parliament, and I actually said to myself, Italy is on the cards, because it was an incredible speech by a young journalist, politician. Giorgia Meloni is her name. I'd advise anyone to watch her speech. I tweeted it earlier, and she described with huge passion the decimation of Italy and their reluctance to get involved in this migration pact. And she said, when you are a slave, you serve the interests of George Soros. That's one of the many compelling things that she said. Compare that to the likes of our elected representatives, who would never stand up in the interests of their country and show such passion in their parliament that their country is going to be destroyed. Compare it to the likes of people before prophet Breed Smith, who had the audacity to call the people who stood outside the Dáil the other night, silently, peacefully, singing the national anthem with their tricolours, proudly holding their tricolours. And that woman had the audacity to call them fascists, neo-Nazi scum, I believe was the term that she used for those brave people standing outside the Dáil.
I think you're talking about the same speech. I think, is it Orla Red? Is that the name of the channel? Posted that speech. People can watch it over there.
Now, if she did not say neo-Nazi scum, I stand corrected. But I know that Richard Boyd Barrett and herself were present at that vigil. I was not. And they created all sorts of annoyance, and because that's all they're there for. They're the controlled opposition. They're the pretend opposition. That's their function, to pretend that they are representing the opposition. But they're just traitors to Ireland. That's all they are. But you compare it to the likes of this brave Italian woman who stood up in her parliament in the last couple of days and showed such patriotism for her country. And you look at the caliber of what we have in our parliament. It's truly disgusting.
Yeah, no, I mean, pretty much everybody's sold out at this point. But look, it's obviously discouraging, you know, to look at it in that perspective. But I think the Irish people are pretty smart. I just think that we have to reach them, and it is. And I know this is anecdotal, so it's not exactly, you know, calls for much positivity here. But I think it is getting a little bit easier to talk about these things. And they are saying that Generation Z is going to be the most conservative since, you know, pre-war or whatever. So I think that this is why it's crucial over the next 5 years that we just hang in there, and that's all we have to do. I mean, I can't change what happens in the Dáil tomorrow. I can't change what's going to happen on Saturday. But if somebody commented in the live chat there, they said, you know, is this protest that's going out on this on Saturday, is it going to be controlled opposition? Is people before profit going to hijack it because they've tried to hijack the yellow vest movement? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that question. All I know is tomorrow I'm going to try my best to do a really good video. That's it. That's all I can do. And the thing is that we can only plant the acorn. You know, we may not actually have the opportunity to sit beneath the tree and enjoy its beautiful canopy, but that's why we plant the acorn, for other people to enjoy the tree. And there's a nobility in that.
There is. And I mean, you know, yes, it's very important for people to don their yellow jackets. I've no doubt that this organization will be hijacked, you know, as organizations are in Ireland. I'm sorry to be so pessimistic, but that's the reality. But we are really encouraging people, you know, to run for the local and European elections, which are coming up in the blink of an eye in May, less than 6 months away. And, you know, we have the chance then to kick the establishment parties out of our local authorities, out of local government, where important decisions are made every single day, and to kick them out of Europe, and to put in a much more Eurosceptic group of people who will watch what is going on in Brussels and tell Brussels, we're not doing it this way. We're not doing it.
Oh, I go one better than Eurosceptic. I'm just anti-EU, full stop.
Well, look, exactly. Look, I mean, I believe we need to get out of Europe immediately, and all this fuss over Brexit is purely about.
I will say this, if I can add just a note of caution on that point, if I may. Yes, we absolutely do need to leave the EU and get out of the UN and everything else. We need to completely cut ties with these vultures, but. The first thing we need to do is recognize that the model of Brexit will likely not work if we try to apply it to Ireland, because it hasn't worked in the UK. Now, the first thing, if we're going to actually get out, we need to make sure that the Irish people are genuinely on board with the idea of leaving. Firstly, if by some miracle we do manage to get a referendum in the next few years to leave, we're going to need a party that genuinely wants to leave. If that's Irexit or National Party, whatever it is, we're going to need a government that is genuinely wants this to happen. And that's the reason why we had the referendum in the first place. The UK got it wrong because UKIP couldn't form a majority. And it was only ever supposed to be a sounding board. It was supposed to be an opposition party that would hold the government accountable. So we need more than that. Now, what we can do in the interim is we can learn to say no, which is what the Eastern European countries are very good at. Poland, Hungary, Austria, they're able to say no. They're still in the EU, and you know, as I said in the video, Poland is still very ethnically Polish, homogenous. So it is possible to stay in the EU and yet give yourself a lot more leverage and control, and that in itself undermines the power of Brussels. But because we have this extremely progressive society, and you'll struggle to name one very liberal progressive society that also has strong borders. Because we have the society, it is very likely, and this seems to be true everywhere, most people who are very sexually liberal and all this kind of emancipation of gender and all this kind of stuff also happen to be people who are very predisposed to wanting open borders and all this kind of stuff, destroying everything in the house, the pillars and everything, the foundations of the house, everything else has to go. So this is the reason why it's important that we turn the culture. If we try to do the politics first, it's not going to work, because we can, like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, these are countries that are far from the influence of Brussels, and yet they're very liberal and they have open borders, more or less. And so Canada has also signed to the UN Migration Pact, to my knowledge, even though it was debated. But so it's not enough. The culture has to change as well. Otherwise, leaving the EU is not going to do us very good. Honestly, I don't think it will. We could still have open borders, and yet we wouldn't be in the EU.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, the brainwashing that has gone on within the schools, within the universities. I mean, our universities are producing workers, not thinkers. And I mean, you know, you see this, you see how a lot of the academics now in Ireland are completely on board with all of this cultural Marxism. You know, they're among the highest paid academics in the world. Our university ratings are falling. And, you know, the caliber of people coming out in their mid-20s, knowing that they're not going to have a secure job in this country. They're not going to be able to rent a shoebox, not to mind dream of owning a decent home. And yet they're obsessed with, not all of them, obviously, but many of them are obsessed with things that are not important, such as, you know, gender change, multiculturalism. So it's been going on, and we're going to have to somehow get those people to waken up and see this isn't what life is actually about. When you get into the real world, you will realize, you know, it's about having a home, having a roof over your head, having enough money to pay for healthcare, because your state won't be able to look after you if you need healthcare. You know, so that generation is, yeah, it's scary actually, Dave, you know, how brainwashed they are.
And also trying to strive for meaning and authenticity in your life. At the moment, it's very much about individualism and materialism, and feminism has promoted that even more. I mean, we have it completely arse backwards, because instead of young girls saying, okay, when they're 18, they might have a job for a few years, they meet someone in their early 20s, they have kids. Instead, they're going into college, then they have a career, and then they're in their mid 30s or late 30s or early 40s, and they still haven't had a child. And we're wondering why our birth rates are so bloody low. I mean, this is the other aspect of this that's extremely important. And this constant appealing to this kind of feminine virtue all the time in our politics, of say, because the thing is, this feminized utopia doesn't exist anywhere. No. And it's not going to be successful. And all it's going to do is, I feel the emotional rhetoric that's being used to propagandize people in the media is always like, okay, something terrible happened to a migrant child. There was a boy on the beach. Okay, well, why was there? Well, because it was an illegal NGO boat. Well, we're not going to talk about that. Okay, a child died, which is tragic. It shouldn't have happened because the boat shouldn't have come in, and we shouldn't have encouraged open borders to begin with. So that child's life should never have ended. But the point is that now it's like, oh, one child died, frame that in a particular narrative, open the borders. It was exactly the same with those migrant detention centers on the US border in Mexico. And they pulled pictures in 2011 under the Obama administration and tried to frame that on Trump, when he had actually built what were basically like, they were like summer camps that he built for the kids, when they're actually taken from the adults that they come with, because they don't know if they're the actual parents of the children. It's precisely the same thing, but the emotional rhetoric is drummed up with this maternalistic instinct to, you know, help absolutely everybody. And what does that lead us to? It leads us to Sweden levels of pathological altruism, where they're literally going to a stage now where they're asking Swedes with a second home, with a summer home elsewhere in the country, you know, can you give that out to a migrant family? This is where we are now. And,
look, I mean, I was asked by elected representatives during the presidential campaign. Elected representatives asked me, if I became president, would I allow homeless people to live in Áras an Uachtaráin? And you think, this is the level of intelligence you're dealing with. How is that going to solve the housing crisis if, you know, a number of people move into Áras an Uachtaráin? And it's exactly the same. Like, and these were, you know, supposed to be people who, you know, would have a vague idea of what's going on in the country. And I kept hearing this the whole time. It's such nonsense. It's so immature. But the point is, Dave, that none of this, we could bring in 6 million migrants and it would not solve the problems of the second and third world. If anything, it will increase them, because we're taking away often the people who are the most educated. And they don't end up having I don't think they end up having a better life here. They're ripped away from their families. They're having to live in conditions which may not be even much better than they would be at home, but at least at home, they'd be in their own culture. They'd be around familiar surroundings and their friends and family. And it's just painting a utopia that does not exist. We, as a tiny island, cannot help. We've done an awful lot to help the third world, but by bringing the third world to our island, we are going to create the third world. We will smash what is left of our welfare state. We will smash it. There will be nothing left for anyone who needs it. And that's happening, and people need to see it. I was looking at one of the most ludicrous things I've seen from a political party recently, and it came from Sinn Féin, no less, in response to something I had put up about the Migration Pact. And it was a flag which said, "No person is illegal."
Oh yeah. They did this for a while in the US, actually. No one can be illegal. No, if I go to the US without my passport, I get over there. It takes me several days to get there by boat, and I try to get through immigration without a passport. I'm an illegal immigrant. That's it. You and I wouldn't dream of traveling to another country without our passport and the correct documentation.
Well, no, but Sinn Féin sees it differently. They're saying
if you adopt that attitude, it's a soft bigotry of low expectations. In other words, I just don't expect other people. I don't expect the rule of law to apply to other people because they're black or brown and because they come from a poor country. It's incredibly condescending. And that is actually the soft big. That's genuine racism, to actually not hold them to the same standard as us. No, I expect them not. And here's the thing, whether it's several of the NGOs now, we're at a point where initially they said, it's only refugees. It's refugees, asylum seekers. These people are fleeing terrible persecution. And now they're literally, and same with the censorship, with this recent speech from Tim Cook or whatever it is, the gloves are off. They can only deny, they know they can only deny it for so long. Now they're literally saying, yeah, whether they're economic migrants, it doesn't matter. That guy who's involved with that NGO that Bono's involved with, and he's literally saying whether they're asylum seekers or they're, economic migrants, they will be coming and we will be senescent. We will be senile. Great. We'll be useless. We just replace ourselves already, So no, it's complete nonsense. They've always tried that, no person is illegal. And it sounds wonderful and people, retweet it and want a virtue signal about it. But let's be honest, none of them want to live near a direct provision center or in an area that's been diversified in that particular way. They all want to live in Dublin 4, whatever the hell it is, these people, and similar places, and they don't want to share in the cultural enrichment and the vibrant diversity.
Without a doubt. And I mean, in the same way you would never see a wind farm going up in the likes of Dalkey or Donnybrook or, the heart of Dublin 4, you will never see a direct provision centre opening in any of those wealthy suburbs of Dublin or Montenotte in Cork. It's not going to happen. And these people think they are removed from it all. And it won't affect them. In fact, it is going to affect them. And we only have to look at some of the suburbs in North Dublin at the moment, which are seeing ghettos forming. Ghettos have been formed. It's not being reported in the mainstream media. And there is a crime epidemic in some of the suburbs of North Dublin. And, we have to spell it out for what it is. Unfortunately, it is down to a clash of cultures, people coming into this country who are starting to feel completely alienated, disenfranchised, and it is creating problems for people living in residential suburbs. Now, I know that many people in those suburbs are frightened to speak out about this, but I am making an appeal tonight to anyone, even, in a situation where they feel that to speak out would be to be called a racist, to speak out anyway, because in your heart you are not a racist. Today, in the last 24 hours, I was described as an anti-Semite by a disreputable outfit in Jerusalem on a completely baseless claim. And it is an absolutely horrible thing to be called. I mean, I've been called every name under the sun since I started speaking out about this migration pact. I didn't think I was going to be called anti-Israeli, but that's the latest smear against me. And you know in your heart and soul that you are not any of these things, and that is all that matters. So, you know,
yeah, they did that recently. Joe Scarborough on MSNBC. If you criticize George Soros, that's an old anti-Semitic dog whistle. No, it's not, Joe. You literally just pull that out of your ass. It's never been an anti-Semitic dog whistle. The truth of the matter is, I can criticize George Soros without criticizing anyone else or any other group of people.
Absolutely, and it wasn't even to do with George Soros. But I mean, you know, people need to be firm in their own convictions. We are not a racist people in Ireland because we're very well travelled. We love, I mean, you know, there has never been, I don't believe, we have been subjected to racism at times when we went to the UK, etc., the generations before us. We are not a racist people, and don't let anyone in RTE or these crazy NGOs funded by George Soros tell you otherwise. Don't let anyone come into your community, which you're trying to protect, which you have built up, which your parents and grandparents have left for you and for your children. Don't let anyone come into your community and tell you that you are a racist. I mean, Dave, I watched that video that was put out by the Department of Justice there a few months ago. What's it called? We Are All Irish or something?
Oh, is this the one? Is it Project 2040?
It's something to do with the new Irish, and they all, you know, these are all people from different ethnic backgrounds, and you know, they're obviously, I think most of them would have been reared here, but it was put out. They talk about how, you know,
was this go out in the summertime?
It went in the summer, yes.
Okay, so they're all going. Whenever anyone asks where I live or where I'm from. Is that the one? Right. And they always say that you're not Irish or whatever.
I saw it tonight for the first time, and I see, because the Department of Justice tweets it every so often, and it was so sneering. It's called "What Does Irishness Look Like?" Now, I'm not saying that the poor people involved in this, you know, necessarily wanted to come across as racist towards Irish people, but they did, because it seems to be the message that they were either told to put out or that they put out of their own volition, was one of, you know, people ask us where we are from, where are we from originally, because most of them are either black or coloured or clearly not originally Irish. Let's face it. I'm not afraid to say that.
Well, they're not Gaelic. Yeah. No, I see the video. I've seen the video. I actually, would you believe it? I only saw it today as well. A friend sent it. So it must be doing the rounds again. And I believe the likes and comments are disabled, or at least the comments anyway. So.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay. So, but it's very patronizing towards, I'm going to say, Irish people. And, you know, I don't, they can say what they like. It's suggesting we are racist. It's suggesting that, you know, we look at colored people with an Irish accent and think, how could you possibly have an Irish accent? In fact, what I would say is happening to these people when they are asked, where are you from? Actually, or where, you know, or what, you know, I'd say that's just the Irish friendliness coming out. Yeah. I'd say it's just, you know, the curious nature of Irish people. They want to get to know you. We do that as a race because there's so few of us. Invariably, we always know somebody. Like, it's like 3 degrees of separation usually. You'll always, the first thing you do when you meet another Irish person is, who do you know in common? And you invariably will know.
That's, so that's something that, or actually Orla Red is in the chat, and he brought up something that I'd meant to say in my video. Wouldn't have mattered. It got placed into limited state anyway. But anyway, he said Flanagan told 3,000 people at the citizenship ceremony, I think this is the one in Kerry he might be talking about, that our history is now their history, something to that effect. Our heritage is your heritage. He said something like that, which is unbelievably Orwellian.
Untrue.
Yeah, it just simply isn't. And it actually was funny because Lauren Southern did a video before an interview outside of a mosque. I think it might have been in East London. So she was in London in a particularly Islamified area.
Mm-hmm.
And she's talking to several people there who have now British citizenship. And she asked,
just explain who Lauren Southern is, would you, to our viewers?
Oh wow, I've done this to the three people who probably don't know at this point. Lauren Southern is a Canadian, I guess, journalist or conservative political commentator, I guess you might say. She's been on YouTube for a long time, and she's done a lot of videos criticizing feminism and most recently mass immigration. And she was among the first to be kicked off of Patreon. She's banned from the UK for a social experiment that she did, in which she joked that I don't even know if I can actually say it.
I was just thinking that, right, well, that a certain religious figure is gay.
Yeah.
And it's not Jesus Christ.
Yeah, well, there you go. Thank you.
Because you can say that about him, no problem.
Exactly, yeah.
And nobody minds.
Lots of publications have said, was Jesus gay and all this kind of stuff. Nobody bats an eyelid. Maybe a few Christians do genuinely grit their teeth at that, and understandably so, but they don't mind. Nobody gets banned from a country. She was banned from the UK, just showing that Sharia is well and truly enforced there. But it was funny just on the point that he made in the comments. Lauren was in London, and she asked people there, what does Britishness mean? And is it something? Is it an ethnicity? What is it? Is it culture? Is it just a passport? And most of them just said, it's just a passport. It's just a passport. It's just a passport. And obviously these people were first or second generation, I guess, immigrants. And then she asked one guy, she said, so you're British? Yes, I'm British. And then she said, well, if I go to Japan, could I be Japanese? Or if I go to China, could I be Chinese? Something like that. And he said, well, no, of course not. And she says, why not? And he just stops. And there was another video, not just the video that you talked about earlier, but there's another one that I covered in a video. I think it's called Things Are Going Great. And this, there was a woman, I think she's originally from, is it Pakistan? Pakistani parents, but she lived most of her life in Dubai. It's kind of a famous video now, and she's doing a TEDx talk or something. And she's saying that, I'm Irish now. And, we need to get away from this vision of the porcelain hue and the freckles. Unbelievably racist, that's not what Irish is now. So basically, it's this idea that Irishness is effectively some sort of aftershave you can just spray on, I guess. So she goes on like this for a while, but there's no way that I would ever go to Japan and go, I'm Japanese now. People are going to ask me where I'm from. And more to the point, Gemma, I would never have the audacity, the gall to actually say, excuse me, I'm Japanese. Or Ugandan if I go to Uganda.
But I've no doubt these poor people are being told to, like some of them are being told to say this, because it's all being pushed by the NGOs, that these are the new Irish. Now, the old Irish, they're dying out. There's going to be none of them left. And you all, guys, and you'll all, work a bit, for less, and you'll be willing to sleep 10 in a bed sit, and you'll be our slaves. That's where it's going. But for the moment, we're going to treat you very well. Surely these people must look at how they treat, citizens who've been here longer than them, whose grandparents and parents were born here. And they must look, God, they treat their citizens like dirt. Why is it that they're treating us so nice at the moment? What's coming down the tracks?
Here's the thing. In that video, there's a little bit of animosity, isn't there? There's a little bit of like, there's a bit of animosity directed towards Irish people. It's a bit of a dig, and it's a bit, genuinely, there's a bit of a, I don't know how to describe it, but you get a sense, and it seems to be okay for them to be, I mean, you're supposed to be gracious that we let you into the country, and yet I don't see any appreciation. There's a disrespect there for Irish people that we should just, we're going to be lectured about what it is to be us in our own country. I found it very disrespectful. I found there was contempt in it. There was an element of sneering going on. And, we are known, if you were to say, what is the characteristic of Irish people? Most people around the world would say their friendly nature. They'd probably say their love of alcohol as well, but they would say their friendliness. That's what we have always been known for. But that friendliness is going to go, Gemma, because, and I'm already seeing it. I mean, Dublin, you walk around and I see a lot of gloomy faces. And like I said in that video, I mean, it's just people are just not looking at you in the eye. And I get a sense it's not a place I like spending an awful lot of time. And more to the point, that friendliness, I don't hear that from people so much anymore.
Oh, it's very much going.
Yeah, it is, because, and it's understandably so that it would go, because most of the people that they meet are also other people who are kind of, in a way, a multicultural society creates a lot of lost souls, you know, kind of swimming in this fishbowl. You know, it really does. And nobody's really connected to the place in any meaningful way. And as John has said quite rightly, you can go down to Kerry and look out, and then look out of the coastline at the west coast in this beautiful country of ours, and you can go, this is our country. And I actually don't feel that sense of ownership. I don't feel like I can say confidently that this is my country. I feel very much like it's owned by someone else who probably doesn't even live here.
Yeah, I think a lot of us feel like that now. There's a serious disconnect. You know, all of the things that we loved about Ireland are vanishing before our eyes. You know, even like you see, even, you know, they're building these big cities, and, you know, even the suburb, the towns, the rural towns are starting to look more like American cities, with the outlets on the outskirts, and you just don't feel you're in Ireland anymore.
And those same new suburbs that are being built, which are colossal and often mix fairly low-cost housing in with, let's be honest, a lot of the housing, though, I have to say, nowadays, and even estates that were built up in where I used to live, are now, they basically have no driveways. There's no parks for the kids. There's nothing like that built. There's no church. There's no community center. The main center, the main hub for commuting for those people living in that industrial estate, or sorry, industrial estate, housing estate, feels like an industrial estate, is going to be the shopping center.
Oh, well, that's what it's all about. You know, this
the
is
Starbucks.
The new religion. This is the new, you know, you go to Dundrum on Sunday, you don't stay with your family, or, you know, spend some time with your children. Well, you do, but you're, you know, pushing the buggy around Dundrum or wherever. You know, this is, shopping and sport are the replacements of what some people might have held dear to them, their faiths or spirituality, because people now are so depressed, and they're wondering why it is the shopping and the fake tan and the fake eyebrows and the fake everything and the Man United every second night. Why is it that I still feel so miserable? But this is what they're asking themselves, because these are not the things that are going to make them happy. They're not going to make them satisfied. And you know, we could go into this in a lot more detail, you know,
well, in a time when people are told that everything that was in the past, all conventional wisdom and traditional wisdom going back thousands of years, I mean, that was patriarchal or somehow white supremacist or somehow sexist against women or oppressive in some way. So we've rejected it. We've basically taken, you know, thrown the baby out with the bathwater, as it were. And so, you know, we've hacked away at all the pillars of society. There's nothing left, and we're just going to end up with rubble. And this is really where we are. But I do feel that there is an awakening in that. And this is the reason why I come back to, we have to hang in there for as long as we can. Because what we need to be communicating, and maybe I need to take my own advice here, is providing people with a better understanding of how to live, really, and what constitutes a meaningful life. And I know that, you know, consistently surveys on women in career women have shown that they're less happy with each passing decade. And that is a result of feminism. And it's not a surprise. We've pitted the genders against each other. We've torn them apart. Things are very, very difficult for single mothers, but also for fathers who are now torn from their children, and unfair child custody settlements and divorce settlements and all these kinds of things. And on top of that, the media is telling women they don't need no man, and men aren't good enough for all sorts of things. And so men don't feel particularly, I suppose, connected to their masculinity. They don't have any level of conviction or self-confidence, and that's obviously demoralizing for them. It's also creating a generation of young men who are more effeminate. The school system is responsible for that. So they're not really attractive to a potential mate anyway. And in addition to that, women are being forced to take the conventional role, traditional role of men, go into the workforce. And is it any wonder that they're actually moving away from their own maternal instincts and they're miserable? So all of these things, but there is a bottoming out at the same time. Same with censorship, same with demonetization, same with all these things, same with globalism. There's a bottoming out at some point where the rubber meets the road. Now, unfortunately, I'm hoping for Ireland things don't have to get as bad as they have done in the UK and France, if we choose to. And that's why what happens, as I say, over the next few years are going to be crucial. But as for what people in the comments can do, and I know it sounds exacerbating, but there is things that you can do. And the first thing I would say is not to carry this on your shoulders all by yourself, because I've been there, and it can crush me as well. And that's why it's important to, even if it's just among friends, or build up a social circle and meet in the real world and just talk about this. And conversations in the real world we have to take this stuff offline. And then before long, you can create your own societies. And there are other social networks. We're not just reliant on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook. There are other places in which we can convene online and then meet in the real world and start something from there. But it is very important that people do that. Civic engagement is really, really important in our own little enclaves.
Yeah. And I mean, Dave, we're not, when we talk about conservative, progressive, I mean, to me, progressive society is one that, strives towards breaking real inequality, not the nonsense that's spoken about today, but the gap between the rich and the poor. The left used to represent the poor, the working class. That's why I would consider myself traditionally on leaning to the left, but the left doesn't represent that anymore. It just doesn't. They don't care about the poor. They don't care about the widening gap between rich and poor. So, I mean, I've lost my train of thought there. But
what I will say is, on that note, once you kind of learn what you learn about how society works, how they're built, and then ultimately how they're saved, it becomes very difficult to actually identify as liberal, because it's always a slippery slope.
Yeah, no, the point I want to make is, we're not harking back to, the days of Dev or any suggestion that, everyone gets back into the sackcloth, or, that we turn ourselves back.
No, look, we're not asking that we give up on the age of enlightenment or anything. Yeah.
When we talk about conservative, it's about conserving the things that are good in society, in Irish society in particular, the things we loved, the friendliness, the sense of community, the sense of knowing your, neighbors and looking out for them, etc. That's what we mean. And by progressive, we mean progressing towards a better democracy, not a country that tells, children that they're not actually the gender that they actually are. This is not progressive. So that's why these terms are being thrown around at the moment. And I think it's important, seeing as people insist on using them, that people understand what they mean. Conservative is about conserving the things that are worthwhile. Conserving.
I think Maajid Nawaz said it best when he used the term regressive. I think it's a far more apt term for them, that they're almost pulling us back to an intellectual dark age, which is far more likely. But what I will say on the subject, just getting back to what we spoke in the start, I want people to know, because I didn't say this in the follow-up video that I did today, I did appeal the limited state on the video, and YouTube rejected the appeal, which means that this wasn't just some random flag. Someone in YouTube actually did watch it and re-reviewed it and decided to maintain the restrictions on the video. And now that's quite worrying, because, well, from YouTube, obviously, because it means that fundamentally, I mean, they're just simply against the idea, it seems, or they find it offensive, the idea that Ireland should remain Gaelic. That's all I can deduce from that. It's not surprising, but there we are. And particularly when we know what we know about Google. Eric Schmidt has previously said, I know he's not directly involved anymore, but he did previously say, this is not about censorship, it's about taking it off the page. That was a quote. He was literally talking about censorship, making it harder to find. Well, this kind of content is now harder to find. And so I think this is the reason why we probably need to do more real world activism, and begin to marry what we do in the social media, in new social networks, with what we do in the real world.
Absolutely. And I mean, don't forget that, Silicon Valley have a very easy ride in Dublin. They get great sort of, obviously they get huge sort of, tax benefits, etc. And most of them their European headquarters are here. So they are under the cosh and they will be obedient. And what's ironic about Silicon Valley is that they present themselves to be so cool and so young and trendy and out there. In fact, they're anti-free speech, they're anti-freedom of expression, they're censoring along the lines of something that would make George Orwell blush. It's shameful. These people are not cool by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, they've become the new puritanical fundamentalists. They become the establishment. And I suppose that's the reason they go after memes, because they're so easily memed and trolled now. But it is, there wasn't a time, this wasn't always the case. This is ratcheted up, and I've seen this ratchet up in the last 5 years. If you look back at prior to April of, was it March? Late March, when Adpocalypse happened, most everything would get monetized, with few exceptions. They'd begun the demonetization in mid 2016. I had a video about Hillary Clinton that was demonetized. It was the first one that it was hit. And then after that, in March now, they've changed completely. But prior to that, Google was relatively chill on a lot of these things. But we have to understand it's the same with Patreon. With Jack Conte, who recently, Patreon have kicked off a number of prominent YouTube creators, including the likes of James Allsup, Sargon of Akkad, and many others. And they kick them off, and the justification is not consistent with what's been said by their CEO, Jack Conte, in the past. Lots of people are censored for very different reasons, and I've listed them, several of them in the last few videos, whether it's Brittany Pettibone or Red Ice being cut off of PayPal, or BitChute being cut off of Stripe or PayPal as well. Gab, the same thing. The justifications are always slightly different. Lauren Southern was cut off because of her activism in the Mediterranean, or she wasn't really involved in activism. She was simply documenting what Generation Identity were doing, but she was cut off for that reason. And now we're actually at a stage. I mean, Milo was trying to get on, Milo Yiannopoulos was trying to get on Patreon. We're getting to a stage now where, and we look at the Alex Jones model, and now what's happening to Gavin McGuinness. You look at it, and
what's happening to Gavin McGuinness? Just explain.
Gavin McGuinness was kicked off of Twitter, and then I think his YouTube channel has been reinstated, but he was hit with a number of copyright claims.
And then just to explain who he is to our viewers.
Gavin McGuinness he's Canadian, and he's I don't want to misrepresent him. I believe that he's conservative. I think he used to be on another political commentator in Canada. He used to be on CRTV. Stephen Crowder is also there as well. So he's been deplatformed on a lot of different major social networks. I believe he has his channel back. I could be wrong. But at any rate, when it came to Alex Jones, I think everybody knows Alex Jones of InfoWars, being censored in basically from a lot of platforms in one day, Apple beginning that, it was, they claim that it wasn't coordinated, but that's quite extraordinary if it wasn't, for all of these companies having slightly different terms of service in the way they enforce them, and yet they're all sufficiently nebulous enough to be broad enough, to be general enough, to be selectively enforced, which they will be, and almost always conservatives run afoul of them, not liberals. Now, the other important point is, because he was censored on one, it created a domino effect. So we're at a stage now, and this is important for people to know, that you're not really safe on any of these at any point. So you can say, well, I was kicked off of this, but I'm still on Twitter. I was kicked off Facebook, but I'm still... No, or vice versa, whatever it is. They will simply go, well, you were a bit of a liability for that platform, and they're kind of similar to us, and they're really only down the street in terms of Silicon Valley and our little leftist bubble, so we're going to kick you off as well. That's kind of where we are. And there's none of this kind of warnings or strikes or anything. People are getting kicked off of Twitter every single day. People you've probably never even heard of.
Twitter is it's an absolute, it's a horrific place. And of course, the person who runs Twitter in Ireland is the former head of the Garda Communications Unit. Sinead McSweeney is her name. Very senior person in the Gardaí, formerly. And she worked for the PSNI. She's married to a man who was a barrister and is a barrister for the disgraced former Garda commissioners, Noreen O'Sullivan and Martin Callanan. Noel Whelan is her husband, a former Fianna Fáil person. You know, people need to know about this. The abuse, the threats that go on Twitter, which you report, and you never ever get any outcome. And yet, if you were to say that you don't necessarily believe that a boy can be a girl or a man can be a woman, you'll be banned.
Oh, the new one, I believe, is dead naming.
Oh, explain.
Dead naming is where you refer to somebody by their original name from their original gender. So that's also against the Twitter laws. So
if I decide I'm actually John instead of Jane, and somebody calls me Jane, I can be banned. Is that right? Or they can be banned?
Yeah, if they it would be seen as the way the media has couched that one is that it's dehumanizing. Right. Which is extraordinary.
I mean, it's gone so extreme and so crazy now that the mask is off. Rational people see it and just say you're actually a bunch of lunatics. The game is up. The game is up, I think, Dave, because it's gone too extreme.
Yeah, it is on a lot of that. And the censorship, it's not, up until recently, I was kind of worried about this as we reached the end of the year, but I'm actually just grateful we got to the end of 2018, because I was amazed that we got to the end of 2017. And I'm like, every year and every day and every month is a bonus. Every day I wake up, Gemma, and I wonder when there's going to be a crater where I used to work. But I will say that I'm in touch with, and I'm glad to have built relationships with the likes of Ray Vahi of BitChute, a YouTube alternative, Andrew Torba of Gab, and Bill Altman of Minds. And there's a lot of guys, a lot of very clever people in the crypto community, in the open source community, in the world of decentralization. They're building really incredible stuff, and that is going to be the future. But we're going to have to be a little bit patient because it's still being developed. But that stuff is going to be where we're going to be at.
Absolutely, and free speech will always prevail, Dave. We are. It's really like being in communist Russia or communist China in Europe at the moment.
The EU is starting to feel like the USSR. It is, yeah.
It is. And I mean, I've experienced that, when I was younger, and Glasnost and Perestroika were underway. And, I visited Russia when Russia was undergoing those changes. And I saw the end of communist Russia. And, I mean, you feel, my goodness, it's all coming to pass in Europe now. Who would have thought it in Europe? But it's Europe's turn nearly. It's nearly the way the cycle of history has turned, that now we have to be subjected to
it's
communism.
Sad, though, in the way that this has had to happen, that the Eastern Bloc countries that were affected by communism and by Russia, they obviously do remember their past relatively recently. That's why they will say no to Brussels. That's why Poland and Hungary, and this is why they stand up to them. But Ireland said we were oppressed for a lot longer. I say we, our ancestors were oppressed. Our people were oppressed. This island was oppressed for a lot longer, a hell of a lot longer, hundreds of years longer. And yet it only took a generation and a half, and here we are.
That's it. And people must never forget how strategically valuable Ireland is. Its location, its resources. This is not a little island that has no potential for the world powers. Its location is invaluable to bigger powers that would have their eye on it. And that's another reason why all this globalism is happening, why Ireland is so important in the midst of it all, and why we are being taken over at the rate that we are. But Dave, we finish up maybe on a slightly not so much positive note, but a note whereby maybe I'm going to, you go first, but I want to us to give a few suggestions to our viewers who probably are tearing their hair out.
Well, yeah, I did see a comment there earlier on somebody said, I'd love to do what you do, Dave, but I'm just too afraid, or something like that. And well, to that I would say you don't have to do what I do, although I do want there to be way more people like me and better than me, and I'm sure there will be coming down the line. That would be fantastic. But what I will say is it's a little like, a friend of mine said this recently, it's a little like you're standing at a red light, you're on the keys, and you kind of go, I think I'll chance it, you know, and you run, and then nobody, everyone's standing there and nobody wants to go, and you go first, and then before long a few other people go with you, and then everybody goes, and that's the way it can be. And what I'd say to people is, the best way I've found, from even just from a mental health perspective, and I know that's you know, it's important to manage that as well with this, because it's bleak all the time and you spend a lot of time alone dealing with these subjects. It is important to network with people, and you can do it, and it doesn't matter. You don't have to have 50,000 subscribers on some platform to make it happen. You can just decide yourself with anyone who you think is you know, worth speaking to about this. You can just begin gradually. Set up meetups, set up meetup groups, join local. There are now, you know, small groups that are forming. You can join political parties, Irexit party, national party, whatever it is. You don't just have to do that. You can start things yourself and just have discussions, and go to those meetings, and find like-minded souls. And we can begin to slowly move the dial politically if we get up off our asses. And it doesn't have to be, and also doesn't have to be super serious and awful. And it can just be a few pints in the pub talking about this stuff. It's a way of helping us gradually deal with it. The first most important thing is just getting out there and learning to come to terms with what's happening, because it is traumatic when you realize it, and just know that you're not alone dealing with this, because I feel like we're all together. It's like what Sherry Turkle said before, it's alone together with social media. We're all together, but we're all isolated, and it's not a good thing for us to be isolated.
And I suppose, Dave, I mean, your generation is really screwed in so many ways, because, you know, you can't, I mean, anyone taking on a mortgage at the moment would be just out of their minds to do so. And then you're paying dead money in rent. And I think it's about maybe trying to say to all of that, your generation, and you know, people in their 40s and 20s who are stuck in the same boat, you know, to say, are we going to be slaves to the banks that we bailed out, that our parents bailed out to the tune of 60-70 billion, who are now charging us the highest interest rates in the EU? Are we going to be slaves to them, or are we actually going to challenge them? What could we do if we got together and challenged the banks?
Yeah, this is the thing. There are some people who think, oh, you know, I'll just keep my head down. I'll work. I'll save for a few years, get the house paid off if I can, and you know, keep the head. I'd say nothing, and just hopefully it'll blow over. Look, we're headed for a massive property bubble burst. We're headed for a huge global financial crisis that's going to make 2008 look like a bad weekend. It's going to be very, very bad. Whatever the hell you're saving in your mattress is going to be worth absolutely nothing. So this is the truth of the matter, is this business of saving for some future. We're all to some degree trying to save for some future, and the future, the way we're on, the track that we're on at the moment is not a future I want to live in. And so it's not going to be worth simply doing nothing. It is going to be worth actually getting up off your ass and saving that future for yourself and your kids.
Yeah, very much so. And, you know, as people head into the period of drunkenness and, you know, the crazy sort of excess over the next few weeks that is so far removed from what it is supposed to be about, maybe they could just take a step back from all of that and from all of the expenditure and say, hang on, you know, could I make this Christmas more meaningful for myself, for my children, for my family, for my community, for my country, and actually talk about 2019 and what we can do to make Ireland better and to sort out some of the nonsense.
To make Ireland grand again?
I wasn't going to go down that road.
Let's not get involved in
no, we're not going to go down the MAGA route. But, you know, the other thing I would ask people to do is reach out to the diaspora, because they actually do care about what happens to Ireland, because they want to bring their children and grandchildren back and show them the Ireland that they grew up in, and the Ireland of their dreams and their heartache in many cases, the Ireland they did not want to leave, but they had to leave. There's 60 million of them in America. There's probably the same again in Europe, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, all over the world. They all love their homeland. They want their homeland protected. They are online. They are on social media, and you can reach out to them and you can tell them, Ireland is disappearing. We are going to be an ethnic minority in our own country in 20 years' time. You either do something about it, or you will have no homeland to bring your children and grandchildren to. The diaspora do care about Ireland, especially in America. I know that. I have great family there. I know that they care about Ireland, and they don't want to see it going down the route of some other countries.
They care about their heritage, and that vision of Ireland that you describe, they're very nostalgic towards it, and they remember it and they recall it. It's in their hearts, and it's something that yeah, we need to revive that in Irish people as well, because this is actually what people should do. Just in a final point, is look into the work of Yuri Bezmenov. He's a former KGB agent who defected and he talks a lot about how he defected to America. He talks about all the strategies that were used to demoralize people and demoralize the native populace. All of these things, textbook stuff that's happened to Western countries now that we've succumbed to. And if we can just snap out of this and remind ourselves this is all bullshit, you can be proud of who you are, proud of your country, proud of your past, and ultimately set a course for your future that you can equally be proud of unapologetically, and that none of it makes you racist, and all this garbage needs to be jettisoned and forgotten about. And don't listen to the bully boys, because that's all they are.
Yeah, who said that person's name?
It's a gentleman by the name of Yuri Bezmenov. I'm sure there's a few people in the comments who probably are familiar with him.
Okay. Well,
I'll send you a link. I'll let you know.
Good. And I mean, again, you know, switch off RTE, switch off TV, whatever they call themselves now.
Get a board game for Christmas Day and turn off the television.
Get a board game. Get away from the Irish Times, Dennis O'Brien. Switch off Matt Cooper. All of those people are brainwashing you. Always on YouTube, you will find interesting stuff about what's really going on. They're no longer conspiracy theories. It's all coming to pass. Encourage people to do the same. People who are caught up in the mainstream still, tell them that they're being brainwashed, they're being treated like mushrooms, kept in the dark, fed manure. And the process of awakening is the one that we're going through now. But we are slowly wakening people up. Local elections in May, critical that people who care about their country and their community stand up and put themselves forward, because they will get elected if they stand on an anti-corruption manifesto and a pro-nationalist, because let's face it, you know, the so-called nationalists are long gone, the likes of Sinn Féin, etc., Fianna Fáil, so-called Republicans. And, you know, even just get leaflets done up talking about what is happening, talking about the Migration Pact, and deliver them around your estate, deliver them around your village. That costs nothing. These are the simple things that will wake people up, and it only takes half a day to do something like that. So the lecture is over, Dave, would you say?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
But no,
Dave,
sensible advice.
Well, look, there's lots of little things. We can turn the country around very quickly. We're so lucky. We've such a small population still. The French can bring their country to a standstill in a matter of hours if they want to. There's no reason why we cannot do the same. And we're going to have to start thinking along those lines. And we're going to have to mobilize, because this is a war against our country. This is a fight. Dave and I certainly won't be given up. But there's a strong possibility that we are going to be taken off YouTube and Twitter, Facebook, and certainly our videos.
I took myself off Twitter. I couldn't stand it any longer.
Yeah, well, probably rise to do that. But we will keep fighting for as long as we can. But we can't do it on our own. And there's lots of other people doing what we're doing. But we need this to grow and grow. It's about the future of Ireland. Dave, any last word?
I think you've covered everything, and this light is burning my face, which is why I'm so red. So I can't wait to switch off.
Well, we don't want that to happen. Thank you very much, Dave, for joining me, and I encourage everyone to go onto your brilliant channel. Spend the weekend looking at Dave's videos. They are fantastic. How many subscribers have you?
I think it's close. It's 358 or something like that.
358,000.
Yeah, it's something like that. I'm very, very grateful to everybody who subscribed. I can't believe that I have that many. But it would be good to get you onto BitChute as well, and other places like that. I'm over there as well, so you never know, just in case, you know.
Well, somebody said to me today, you know, Gemma, look, you can actually do it all through Russia. if the worst happens. So, you know, when that's the alternative, that you'll actually broadcast via Moscow, you know, things are pretty bad. And so that's maybe where we might all be heading.
I've heard people saying that they're going to try and set up payment processors in China for us to use, which is so unbelievably ironic. But anyway.
Isn't it? It is. The irony never ceases. But on that note, Dave, thanks again for joining me. Thanks to all of our viewers for bearing with us this evening. Sorry we've been on a downer, but things are becoming more critical by the day, as I suspect you all know at this stage. So I'll be back tomorrow evening. But in the meantime, thanks very much for tuning in, and I'll see you then. Good night.